Brother raised his glass at my engagement dinner and said, "Don't get too comfortable. She never keeps anything good for long." Everyone laughed when he said it. My fiancé laughed too. I should have left right then, I didn't. My name is Mara. I'm 31 now. My brother Dean is 34. Growing up, Dean was the star of our family even when he was failing, lying, or breaking things. My mother called him spirited. She called me severe. That word followed me for years. Severe if I spoke too plainly. Severe if I asked fair questions. Severe if I remembered what happened after everyone else wanted to move on. Dean was fun. I was hard work. If Dean forgot a birthday, my mother said he was busy. If I forgot anything, my mother said I was selfish. If Dean spent too much money, my father said he was learning. If I bought one expensive thing, my mother asked if I thought money grew on trees. That was our normal. My father was quiet in the way weak men often are. He hated conflict more than injustice. That mattered later. When I was 8, Dean took the $50 our grandmother mailed me and bought baseball cards. I found the envelope torn under his bed. My mother said siblings share. When I was 11, Dean broke my music box from Nana and told everyone I had dropped it. My father made me apologize for accusing him. When I was 14, Dean told a boy at church that I was obsessed with him and embarrassing. The boy stopped talking to me. At dinner that night, Dean asked if I was okay in a voice so sweet it made my skin crawl. People like Dean always know how to sound kind in public. That was the danger. You look crazy if you react to a performance everyone else enjoys. By high school, I had learned one rule. Do not react in public if I cried. Dean looked amused and my mother looked tired. If I got angry, my father told me to lower my voice. If I stayed quiet, people called me mature. What they meant was manageable. The only person who saw the pattern clearly was my great-aunt Helen, my grandmother's sister. Everyone called her Aunt Hel, never to her face when she could hear it. She lived in a blue house with white shutters and too many potted herbs on the back steps. Her house smelled like lemon tea, starch, and rain-soaked wood. When I was little, I spent weekends there helping her fold linens and label jam jars. She watched people the way other people watch storms. One summer afternoon, when I was 15, Dean had just thrown a fit because my mother would not let him borrow the car. 30 minutes later, she handed him the keys anyway. I was at Aunt Hel's table slicing peaches too hard. She looked at my hands and said, "You're cutting fruit like it insulted your bloodline." I laughed, then I cried. I told her I hated the person I became around my own family. She set down her knife and said, "No, honey, you hate the role they keep assigning you." I never forgot that. The role they keep assigning you. That was exactly it. In my family, I was always assigned a role. Reliable one. Calm one, reasonable one, the person who cleaned up after everybody else's chaos and then got praised for not making a scene. Aunt Hel saw me. My mother hated that she did. If Aunt Hel praised my grades, my mother said Dean was more social. If Aunt Hel praised my work ethic, my father said Dean had natural charisma. Praise in our family worked like rationing. If any came to me, someone rushed to increase Dean's share. I left for college at 18 and almost never looked back. I got a scholarship 2 states away. It was not glamorous, it was freedom. I studied project management and finance because I liked systems, deadlines, and things that actually held together. Numbers do not gaslight you. Spreadsheets do not cry to avoid consequences. I worked nights at an event venue and learned how to wear black shoes for 12 hours without wanting to die. I loved it for the first time. Nobody entered my room without knocking. Nobody told my stories before I could tell them. Nobody asked me to become smaller so someone else could feel bigger. That was also where I met Colin. He was not flashy. He was not loud. He had a calm face, careful hands, and a habit of listening all the way to the end of my sentences. The first time we worked a wedding together, I spent 15 minutes ranting about a vendor schedule that had collapsed. When I finished, he smiled and said, "You don't panic. You organize." No one had ever noticed me kindly like that before. We dated for 5 years, not perfect years, real ones. Apartment fights about dishes, cheap pasta, long drives, shared grocery lists, bad couches, good mornings, the ordinary shape of trust. That is how I knew it mattered. Then I made my mistake. I brought him home too often. The first Thanksgiving he spent with my family. Dean smiled too brightly. He asked endless questions. What kind of women had Colin dated before me? Was he always this quiet? Did he ever get tired of people who plan every breath? Everyone laughed. Even Colin smiled politely. Under the table, my hands shook. I knew that tone. Dean was not joking. He was measuring. After that, little things started happening. Colin brought up private stories from my childhood I had never told him. Humiliating ones, the time I fainted in choir because I skipped breakfast. The time my mother made me wear one of her old bridesmaid dresses to a holiday dinner. Because family doesn't waste money. When I asked how he knew those things, he said Dean told him. I asked Dean to stop. He laughed and said, "Relax, he should know what he's marrying." That line stayed in my chest like a nail. Then Colin started canceling plans to help Dean with random things. A ride to pick up a sofa, advice about starting a business, a late night call because Dean was having a rough one. I told myself men could be friends. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself a lot of things that kept me from naming the truth. Then, 6 months before our wedding, Colin proposed at the botanical garden where we had our third date. It was simple, no audience, no hidden photographer. Just him, a ring, wet grass, and my heart in my throat. I said yes. For 24 hours, I told no one except my best friend Lena. I wanted one clean day. Then my mother saw the ring at Sunday lunch. By dinner, the entire family knew. That was where this story really started. The engagement dinner was at my parents' house 2 weeks later. My mother used her good china. My father opened expensive wine like the event was about him. Dean arrived late with a grin already loaded. At first, everything looked normal. Too normal. That should have warned me. Then Dean tapped his glass and gave his little toast. Don't get too comfortable. She never keeps anything good for long. People laughed. My mother swatted his arm and said, Dean. But she was smiling. My father shook his head like boys will be boys, and Colin laughed too. That hurt more than the line itself, because it meant he still did not understand the shape of what I lived inside. Later that night, after dessert, I found Dean and Colin in the garage drinking beer and laughing about some story from my childhood. I walked in just in time to hear Dean say, if she gets quiet, that's when she's building a case. They both looked at me. Colin said, we were just talking. I nodded. Then I said, you always are. I should have left then. I didn't. A month later, my grandmother died. Not Aunt Hel, my mother's mother, the woman whose approval everyone had chased for decades. She was not warm. She was not especially kind. But she had money, a paid-off townhouse, and a small commercial unit downtown she rented to a tailor. That was enough to turn every family dinner into a silent property war. I was not close to her. Dean was not close to her either, but my mother acted like both of us had lost a saint. At the funeral, she cried loudly. Dean stood near the front where people could see his grief. I stood in the back and felt mostly tired. Then Aunt Hel squeezed my hand and whispered, watch what happens after the casseroles stop. I should have listened harder, because a week later, the will reading turned into a crack in the whole family. The townhouse went to my mother. Some savings went to a charity and my aunt. The commercial unit was left in trust for future sale, with proceeds to be split between my mother and her children. That sounded simple. It wasn't, because the unit needed management first. The tailor's lease was ending. Someone had to handle inspections, valuation, and sale prep. My mother immediately volunteered me, not because she respected me, because I was useful. Dean objected immediately, not because he wanted the work, because he wanted control. He said I would manipulate the numbers. I almost laughed. He had once borrowed $3,000 from my father and claimed the bank app was wrong when asked where it went. Still, my mother nodded like he was making a serious point. Then Aunt Hel said dry as dust. If Mara manipulates numbers, they at least usually end up balanced. That shut the room up for 10 blessed seconds. In the end, I took over the unit management anyway because someone had to. That was always the way with my family. They resented my competence but relied on it like oxygen. While I handled the paperwork, Dean handled the performance. He called brokers and pretended the property was half his already. He bragged to friends that he was about to cash out. He even asked Colin if he wanted to go in on a bigger opportunity once the sale happened. That bothered me not because of the money, because Colin did not tell me right away. I heard it from Lena, whose husband golfed with one of Dean's friends. When I asked Colin about it, he said he was just talking. I stared at him. Then I asked, why didn't you tell me? He rubbed the back of his neck and said, because I knew you'd make it a whole thing. That sentence took all the air out of the room. My family had used that line on me for years, and now he had it too. That was the first time I wondered whether he was drifting toward Dean because it was easier than understanding me. Then more little things started slipping. He'd canceled dinner because Dean needed help with something. He'd laugh off my concerns. He'd say Dean was rough around the edges but had a good heart. That phrase made me want to scream, bad men survive on other people's belief in their hidden goodness. Then came the bridal shower. My mother insisted on hosting. I said I wanted something small. She heard that and planned something large, expensive, and deeply not about me. There were floral centerpieces I hated, a cake in a color I never would have chosen, and at least 20 women I barely knew. Sad part, I still showed up smiling. The worst moment came halfway through gifts. One of my cousins handed me a wrapped box with my grandmother's handwriting on a tag. My stomach dropped the second I saw it. Inside was her old pearl bracelet. I had loved that bracelet since I was 10, before I could even touch it properly. Dean said loudly, "You should give that to Mom. She'd wear it more." My mother smiled and said, "Or maybe to your future sister-in-law someday." Everyone laughed softly like this was charming. My hands shook so hard I had to set the box down, and Colin, sitting off to the side helping move gifts, said nothing. That silence hurt. More and more, his silences hurt. A week later, the tailor officially moved out of the commercial unit. I went with a locksmith to change the locks. The space was dusty, narrow, and full of old mirrors. I stood in the empty room and felt something strange. Possibility, I could see light there. Fresh paint shelves, maybe a little office. Maybe a studio someone would love. I called the broker from the doorway. Then Dean called 5 minutes later asking why he had not been invited to the lock change. I said because he did not own it. He laughed and said, "Neither do you." That line sat in me for days because he was right in the legal sense, but in my family, legal truth never mattered as much as emotional extraction. If I handled the work, they still believed the result belonged to them. A month later, Aunt Hell fell and broke her hip. Everything changed after that. She needed help recovering, and unlike the rest of my family, she had the good sense to ask clearly. So I moved into her blue house for a few months. It became almost a year, and it was the safest year of my life. I worked on the commercial unit sale during the day, then came home, cooked for Hell, helped with meds, and listened to her tell old stories about people who mistook charm for virtue. Dean came by twice, once to complain her TV was too small, once to ask if she was updating her will. Aunt Hell laughed in his face both times. After the second visit, she looked at me and said, "Your brother walks into every room like he's already counting the silver." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled tea. Around that time, Colin changed in ways I could not ignore anymore. He started defending Dean automatically. He said family was complicated. He said I held on to things too long. He said maybe I did make everyone nervous because I remembered everything. That last line almost broke me. Remembered everything, as if memory were aggression, as if accuracy were cruelty. Then came the engagement dinner for Dean and his new girlfriend, Piper. Yes, because apparently there are no new plots under the sun. Piper was sweet in that exhausted way women sometimes get when they have not yet realized they are dating a performance. I liked her immediately, which made what happened next worse. Halfway through dinner, my mother casually mentioned that I might postpone my wedding because Mara gets overwhelmed. I stared at her. Colin stared at his plate. Dean smiled. Then my mother added, "And honestly, Piper is so easy. Some girls are just naturally bridal." Everyone laughed politely. My stomach dropped. I looked at Colin. He still said nothing. That night, after we got home, I asked him if he had ever once truly defended me in that house. He said, "I defend you by not escalating things." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I finally understood. He did not love me enough to stand in discomfort. He loved peace, and peace in my family always meant my silence. 3 days later, I found the text. Not by snooping. By accident. His phone lit up while he was in the shower. Dean's name? A message preview? "You sure you want to marry someone who keeps score like that?" My whole body went cold. I should have put the phone down. I didn't. The thread was weeks long. Jokes about me, stories Dean had twisted and Colin had accepted, conversations about whether I was too rigid to build a fun life with. One message from Colin said, "Sometimes I think she wants me to pick her over everyone every time." Dean replied, "That never ends well, trust me." I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hands and felt the room tilt. It was not one betrayal, it was a slow migration. A quiet shift of loyalty toward the loudest person in the room. When Colin came out of the shower, he saw his phone in my hands and froze. Then he said, "Mara." I held up the phone and said, "Get out," he tried to explain. I said it louder, "Get out." He left with wet hair, one shoe untied, and every soft excuse in the world still in his mouth. That should have been the bottom. It wasn't, because 2 days later, my mother called and asked whether she should give my wedding dress to Piper. I thought I had misheard her. I had not. She said maybe it was a shame to let a good dress go unused if my situation had changed. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down on Aunt Hell's porch steps. I said no. She sighed like I was being unreasonable. Then she said, "Well, Piper's coloring would suit Ivory more anyway." That was the line I opened this story with. Take the ring. He was always too good for her anyway. It came later that week when I went to my parents' house to pick up boxes from the broken engagement. I was still standing in the doorway when my mother held out the ring box toward Piper and said it. Piper looked horrified. Dean looked delighted. And Colin, yes, Colin was there too, looked like he wanted to disappear. I froze. Then I realized something. Piper did not know. She had no idea how deep the rot went. I took the ring box from my mother's hand, put it in my purse, and said very calmly, "Everyone out of my way," then I left. I did not cry until I got back to Aunt Hell's house. That night Hell sat beside me on the porch and let me cry until my throat hurt. Then she said, "Now maybe you stop asking broken people to tell you who you are." I wrote that line down. A month later, Aunt Hell died. That sentence still feels impossible. One day she was there. The next day the house sounded wrong, too quiet. I remember the kettle, the floorboards, the folded blanket on the chair where she always read. There are losses that take your breath, and there are losses that take your witness. Losing Hell was the second kind. At her funeral, Dean cried loudly. My mother talked about family legacy. I stood there numb until Victor, Hell's attorney, asked to speak with me after. I had not even known she updated her paperwork. She had, and she had done it with her usual brutal clarity. She left the Blue House to me. She also left me a separate investment account and first option to buy the commercial unit from the family trust if I wanted it once sale prep ended. I just stared at Victor. Then I asked why. He smiled softly and said, "Because she told me you're the only one who doesn't confuse access with love." That line nearly dropped me. I thought things would explode later. I was wrong. They exploded immediately because my mother had somehow learned enough to guess there was a change, and she cornered Victor in the parking lot after the funeral. He told her nothing. That did not stop the panic. Within a week, Dean was calling relatives saying I had manipulated a dying old woman. My mother started saying I had isolated Hell. Colin texted once to say he was sorry for how things ended. I did not respond. Then someone submitted an anonymous concern to Adult Protective Services about my treatment of Hell during recovery. Too late to matter for Hell, still early enough to stain me. That was when rage left and clarity arrived. I started documenting everything: texts, voicemails, dates, unexpected visits, screenshots, comments. I bought a black binder and labeled sections. At first it felt dramatic, then it felt necessary, because 2 weeks later the camera I had installed at the Blue House after Hell's death caught Dean trying the back door. Dark hoodie, same impatient shoulder jerk. He tugged the handle twice, swore, then walked away. Proof feels almost holy when you've spent a lifetime being told your eyes are too sharp. Victor took the footage. The police took a copy too. Nothing dramatic happened immediately. Apparently one failed entry is not enough to turn the whole world honest. But it mattered to me, because from then on they could never make me doubt the pattern again. Around this time, a man named Eli became important in my life. At first, he was just the commercial real estate contractor working with the broker on the unit's prep list. He was practical, funny in a dry way, and deeply unimpressed by rich family drama. He did not flirt. He did not pity me. He just told the truth plainly, and did the work that was more attractive than any grand gesture I had ever seen. We spent weeks talking about permits, repairs, flooring, lease comps, and the cost of replacing old pipes. Then one night, after a long meeting, he looked at me over takeout cartons and said, "You know, none of this makes you hard to love, right?" I started crying before I could stop myself. People think healing comes as one dramatic moment. Sometimes it arrives as a sentence your body has never been allowed to believe. We did not rush. That mattered. Trust built slowly, quietly. That kind lasts longer. Meanwhile, my family escalated again. A post appeared in a local Facebook group claiming I had manipulated both my grandmother and my aunt for property. The wording was careful, almost legal. That scared me more than open cruelty would have. People commented exactly the way they always do when gossip lets them wear moral outrage like jewelry. If true, she's sick. Money changes people. Poor family. Victor called me before I could even think of responding. He told me not to post anything publicly and to save every screenshot. Then he pointed out something chilling. One sentence in the anonymous post referenced a hallway argument at the hospital when my mother complained about parking and vending machines. No one else had been there, only family. I added it to the binder. Then Dean made an even dumber move. He called Eli from a blocked number. Eli answered because he thought it was a subcontractor. Dean put on a friendly voice and said maybe they should grab a beer sometime because I can be a lot if she thinks people are picking sides. Eli put the call on speaker the second he realized. I sat there at my kitchen table going cold. Dean kept talking. He said I got obsessive. He said I turned everything into evidence. He said people got tired of walking on eggshells around me. Eli finally said, very calmly, "Do not call me again." Dean laughed and hung up. I sat there shaking. Eli looked at me and said, "He wants your reaction. Don't donate it." That line helped. Do not donate it. So I got quieter. Not weaker. Sharper. Months passed. The commercial unit sold. Not to me. I chose not to buy it. That shocked my family more than if I had fought for it. People like my mother and Dean believe you only refuse a prize if you're planning a larger revenge. The truth was simpler. I did not want another building tied to them. I wanted the Blue House, Hell's porch, and peace. Instead of fighting the sale, I took my share and used part of it to restore Hell's house. New roof, new plumbing, fresh paint. The first time I stood in the finished kitchen, I cried. Not because it was perfect, because it was mine without apology. I also found something I had not expected in one of Hell's upstairs closets. A locked cedar chest. Victor had given me the house keys, but not every old key had labels. It took me a week to match the small brass one to the chest. Inside were photo albums, letters, tax envelopes, and a long blue box tied with ribbon. I opened the ribbon first. Inside was a stack of copied emails and handwritten notes Hell had kept over the years. Notes about Dean asking my mother how soon the commercial unit money would clear. Notes about my mother calling me emotionally expensive after I left for college. A printed email from Colin to Dean from 4 months before our engagement ended. I stared at that one longest. It said, "I know she deserves better than this, but it's easier when she doubts herself first." My whole body went cold. I had thought Colin was weak. He was, but he had also been strategic. He had known. He had chosen the easier cruelty. Under that email was one more note from Hell in her slanted handwriting. "If you ever need proof that they knew what they were doing, start here." I sat on the floor for a long time after that, not crying, just breathing, because grief does strange things. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it arms you. I sent copies to Victor. Then I put the originals in a fireproof box. That same week, my mother called and said she wanted to bring over soup. I almost laughed, soup, as if casseroles could bridge fraud. I said no. She came anyway. I saw her through the lace curtain at the front of the blue house, standing there with a pot and a face full of borrowed sadness. I did not open the door. She left the soup on the porch with a note tucked under the handle. It said, "We have all said things we regret. Family should not end over paperwork. Paperwork," that was a nice word for what they had done. Paperwork for theft. Paperwork for lies. Paperwork for trying to erase me cleanly enough that even I might doubt myself. I added the note to the binder. Eli proposed 6 months after the commercial unit sold. Not at the Blue House, at the lake by Aunt Helle's favorite walking path. The sky was gray and the dock boards were damp, and one duck kept circling too close like it was part of the plan. He held out the ring and said, "I don't want a life where you have to prove your reality every day. I want one where you can rest inside it." I laughed and cried at the same time. Then I said yes. For 24 hours I told no one except Lena. I wanted one clean day. Then my mother saw the ring at the pharmacy. By dinner, the whole family knew by morning. Dean texted again. Second time's the charm, I guess. Hope this one likes lawsuits and spreadsheets. I blocked him after that. That felt good, cleaner than I expected. The wedding invitations had already gone out. The guest list did not include my mother, Dean, or Colin. It also did not include half the extended family who had quietly liked Dean's pity posts while asking me in private if maybe I could be the bigger person. I was done being bigger. I was interested in being free. A week before the wedding, the final legal twist landed. Victor called and asked if I was sitting down. I sat before he could finish. He said the typed amendment was not the only thing. Someone had also contacted the title company related to Hell's Blue House using a fake email domain that almost matched his law office. Almost. Sloppy enough to fail, close enough to scare. The title clerk got suspicious and called Victor directly. That one small act may have saved me months of hell. My vision narrowed when he told me. This was no longer vague family cruelty. This was active fraud built on the assumption that I would be too tired to fight. I was tired, that was true, but I was also done. The police got more involved after that. Victor got sharper. Eli changed passwords, backed up files, and installed a second camera at the front gate. Then one more thing surfaced. Lena sent me screenshots from a private group chat she got through a friend of Piper's. Dean had bragged there about the anonymous post, about the block number call, about keeping Mara reactive, and then the line that made me sit down on the kitchen floor. Mom says, "Mara always pays if the room gets uncomfortable enough." There it was. My whole life in one sentence. Make the room uncomfortable enough. Push until Mara smooths it over. Push until Mara apologizes. Push until Mara finances, organizes, forgives, and carries what nobody else wants to hold. I stared at that screenshot until my vision blurred. Then I stopped crying. Something in me had moved past grief into certainty. The wedding morning came cold and clear. The blue house looked beautiful. Herbs on the steps. String lights over the backyard. Small tables with white cloths. No giant centerpieces. No fake grandeur. Just the people who had earned the right to witness joy. For 1 full hour I felt peaceful. Then Lena looked out the upstairs window and said very carefully, "Mara, they're here." My stomach dropped. Then she added, "And Dean brought flowers like this is a movie." Of course he did. I walked to the window and looked down. My mother stood in pale gray as if she had never heard a boundary in her life. Dean stood beside her in a navy suit holding a bouquet and his phone. Colin stood a few steps back looking like a man who regretted his own shape. My hand started shaking. Lena touched my shoulder and said, "You do not have to go down there," but I did. Not alone. Eli came with me. So did Victor. At the front gate, my mother was already crying. Dean saw me and raised the flowers slightly, like an offering that almost made me laugh. He said loudly, "I just wanted to fix this before your big day. A stage, always a stage." My mother stepped forward and said, "Please don't do this in front of everyone." Do what? Exist honestly. I said, "You were not invited." Dean's eyes filled instantly. That speed still amazes me. Then he delivered the line he had clearly rehearsed. "I know you hate me, but I can't lose my sister, too." Guests had started gathering on the porch and in the yard. I could feel eyes. Old panic rose. The old instinct said, "Keep it small. Keep it private. Do not embarrass the family." Then I looked at Eli. Then Lena. Then Victor. Then the porch where Hell had told me the truth for years, and something inside me settled into place. Not rage. Clarity. I said, loud enough for the yard and porch to hear, "You stole from me for years, tried to steal Hell's house, filed false reports, forged documents, sent fake emails, broke into her home, and kept pushing because you thought I'd split everything just to buy silence. Leave silence. Real silence." Dean's tears stopped for half a second. My mother went white. Colin stared at the flowers. Then my mother recovered and said, "How dare you say that here?" Victor stepped forward before I could answer. He said, calm as winter, "She dares because there is evidence that changed the room." Dean lowered the bouquet a little. My mother looked around and realized the audience was not automatically hers. Then Dean did what he always did when cornered. He attacked. He pointed at me and shouted, "You always thought you were better than us. Hell only left you things because you manipulated her when she was dying. Old pain hit first, then something stronger rose behind it. Not shame? Not this time. Truth, I said. Hell trusted me because I showed up. You showed up for money. A sound moved through the guests behind me, not quite a gasp. More like understanding. Then, in full panic, Dean made the worst mistake of his life. He shouted, "If you'd just split it, none of this would have happened." There it was, public, clean, unhidden. A confession shaped like a complaint. I watched the understanding move across the faces around us. My mother closed her eyes for 1 second. Colin whispered, "Dean, too late, way too late." Then my father stepped forward from the side of the driveway. I had not even realized he was there. He had stayed half hidden by the hedge, which was exactly his style. Close enough to hear, far enough to avoid cost, but now he walked into the open and said, "Stop." Not soft, not tired, sharp, everybody froze. He looked at Dean and said louder, "Stop lying, stop blaming her, stop all of it." I forgot to breathe. He turned to my mother and said, "You taught him this and I let it happen." I had never heard him speak that honestly in my life. My mother looked furious and frightened all at once. She said, "This is not the place." He said, "No, this is exactly the place, because you used every other one." Then he faced me in front of everybody and said, "I'm sorry." Just that, no excuse, no speech, no softener. I did not forgive him in that second. Life is not that neat, but I believed him, and that mattered. The planner opened the gate wide and said, "They need to leave now." 2 of Eli's cousins stepped forward too, not threatening, just solid present. My mother grabbed Dean's sleeve. This time he let himself be pulled at the gate. He turned back and said, "This isn't over." And for the first time in my life, I smiled at him without fear. I said, "Yes, it is." They left, all of them. The yard stayed quiet for one long beat. Then Lena clapped once and said, "Okay, great, let's get married." Everyone laughed, real laughter, the kind that releases pressure instead of hiding it. I laughed too, though tears were on my face. Then I married Eli in Aunt Hell's backyard under string lights with rosemary in pots and Truth finally in the open air. It was the happiest day of my life, not because it was perfect, because it was true after the wedding. Things moved quickly. The fake amendment, false reports, title email, break-in footage, blocked number call, screenshot trail, and public confession stopped looking like family drama and started looking like what they were: fraud, harassment, unlawful entry. I'm keeping those parts simple. What matters is that paper trails matter. Screenshots matter. Voicemails matter. Truth likes records. My mother somehow stayed out of the worst consequences through careful denials and expensive counsel. Dean did not. Actions look ugly in black and white, especially your own words. The gossip flipped exactly the way gossip always does when facts arrive. People who had quietly believed I was severe suddenly had kind things to say. I did not need them to. That was new. Not needing the late rescue. My father started therapy again. I'm not writing a fairy tale. He did not become brave overnight, but he started telling the truth in smaller rooms. Once, months later, while helping me fix a broken porch step, he said, "I spent years thinking quiet made me decent. I think it just made me useful to the loudest person in the room." I said, "Yeah." We stood there with tools in our hands and let that be enough. The blue house became mine fully by the end of that year. I kept the herb pots. I kept the wind chime by the side door. I kept Hell's table. I kept the porch swing. Eli and I turned the back room into an office and the sunroom into a reading space with low lamps and old quilts. On the first anniversary of the wedding, I unlocked the front door before sunrise and stood there for 1 quiet minute listening to the house breathe. The air smelled like coffee, clean wood, and rosemary. My hands shook a little when I turned on the kitchen light. Not from fear, from awe. A year has passed now. I'm writing this at Hell's old table while rain taps the windows and Eli hums badly in the kitchen while making breakfast. There is coffee on my desk. There is rosemary on the sill. There's a framed photo near the doorway of us, smiling in a way my younger self would not recognize. Every now and then, someone asks if I regret exposing everything so publicly at the wedding. No. I regret that it became necessary. I regret the years before it, when I confused endurance with love and silence with maturity. I regret every time I made myself smaller, so other people could stay comfortable. But I do not regret the truth. The truth cost me a role. It gave me a life. That trade was worth it. The strangest part is this: for years, my mother acted like I was hard to love because I noticed too much. Dean acted like I was severe because I remembered accurately. My father acted like I was difficult because I would not help bury everything forever. But the problem was never that I saw too much. The problem was that they needed me not to speak. And once I did, the whole machine broke. The last clear thing Aunt Hell ever said to me was in the hospital 3 days before she died. I had adjusted her blanket and was trying not to cry because she looked tired. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "You do not have to starve just because they call your silence love." I did not understand it fully then. I do now. Belonging that has to be purchased with self-erasure is not belonging. Love that only arrives when you are useful is not love. Family that survives by feeding on one person's silence is not family. So no, I did not lose my family at my wedding. I lost a job, I lost the role of person who absorbed everything so everyone else could keep pretending. And in the place where that role used to be, I built a marriage, a house, and a life that finally feels like mine. Turns out Aunt Hell was right. The reward for showing up is not that unfair people become fair. It is that one day, if you keep choosing truth, you stop needing unfair people to explain your worth. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel severe. I felt free. There was one more thing I have not said yet. It matters. A week after Dean and my mother were forced out of the wedding, Piper came back alone. She did not text first. She just showed up at the gate around noon holding a paper grocery bag and looking like she had not slept in days. I almost did not open it. Then I saw her face properly. Not polished, not staged. Ruined. So I let her in. She sat at Aunt Hell's table, wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee and said, "I need to tell you something before he tells it another way." My stomach tightened instantly. She reached into the grocery bag and took out a stack of printed screenshots, then a flash drive, then a folded letter. My whole body went still. Piper said Dean had been using her laptop for months because his old one kept crashing. After the wedding, when he came home drunk and furious, he forgot to log out of an email account he had made. Under a fake name, she found drafts, saved attachments, deleted messages in trash folders, and one scanned version of the typed amendment. I looked at the flash drive and felt my pulse in my throat. Piper started crying before she even got to the worst part. She said Dean had bragged more than once that if he kept me stressed enough, I would write a check just to shut everybody up. That exact wording. Write a check just to shut everybody up. She said my mother agreed. Not every time. Enough times enough to make a plan out of it. Then she handed me the folded letter. It was a note Dean had written to himself on a legal pad and photographed a to-do list. The kind people make when they think they are smart enough to leave themselves reminders. It said, push APS angle harder. See if Colin still has old messages. Talk to title office again through another email. If Mara gets engaged fast, make it about instability. My hands shook so hard, the paper rattled. Piper looked at me and said, I didn't know how bad it was. I knew he was cruel. I didn't know he was organized. That line hit me hard. Cruel is one thing. Organized cruelty is another. I asked why she was giving me all of it. She laughed once badly. Then she said, because I finally realized he wasn't lying to me. He was rehearsing on me. That was one of the truest things anyone ever said about Dean. People like him practice on whoever is closest. Then they call it love. Victor nearly drove off the road when I sent him scans of the list. He called me 2 minutes later and said, do not send this to anyone else until I make copies. So I didn't. Piper stayed for another hour, long enough to tell me one more thing. Dean had not chosen the wedding for the public scene by accident. He picked it because my mother told him that if he could make me look cruel in front of enough witnesses, later facts would matter less. My mother actually said that facts would matter less. That sentence explained almost my whole childhood. When Piper finally stood to leave, she looked ashamed. I understood that look. It is the look of someone realizing they stood beside evil and kept calling it stress. At the door, she said, you don't owe me forgiveness. I said, good, because I don't have it. She nodded. Then she left. I never saw her again. The evidence from Piper changed everything. Not overnight. Real consequences almost never move as fast as lies. But the pattern tightened. The fake title email, the typed amendment, the anonymous posts, the block number call, the attempt to get Colin to hand over old messages, the pressure campaign before the wedding, the public confession at the wedding itself. Individually, each thing could be excused by the kind of people who worship tone over truth. Together they looked exactly like what they were, a strategy. That mattered, because my whole life had been built inside their favorite defense. Misunderstanding, bad timing, a joke taken wrong, a sister being sensitive, a mother under stress, a brother who means well. Piper's flash drive killed all of that. There's no misunderstanding in a to-do list for destroying someone slowly. There's only intent. A month after the wedding, Dean called me from county lockup after some hearing I was not present for. I let it ring out the first time. He called again, then again. On the fourth call I answered, not because I owed him anything, because I wanted to hear what his voice sounded like when charm had finally failed him. He started crying immediately. Real crying this time, I think. Or maybe just fear with Dean. It was always hard to tell. He said everything had gotten out of hand. He said Mom pushed him too hard. He said he never meant for it to go that far. There it was. The soft lie people tell after hard choices, as if disaster just grew by itself in a corner while nobody was looking. I said nothing. He kept talking. He said we were still family. He said I knew how Mom was. He said if I would just tell Victor and the investigators that he had been grieving and unstable, maybe things could settle down. Settle down. That phrase almost made me laugh. Even there, even then, still trying to turn consequences into an overreaction, finally I said, you wrote a list. He went silent. Then he whispered, Piper gave you that? I said, you wrote a list. He started crying harder. Then he said the most honest thing he ever said to me. He said, "I thought you'd fold like you always did." I closed my eyes when I heard that. Not because it hurt, because it fit. It fit every birthday, every family dinner, every stolen dollar, every half smile, every time my mother called me severe because I would not lie for them. I said, "That's over." Then I hung up. He never called again. My mother did, though, not right away. She waited 3 weeks. Then she came to the blue house on a Sunday morning carrying tulips. Tulips. As if flowers had not been used as props in my family for years. I opened the door but stayed in the frame. She looked older, smaller, not softer, just more tired. She said, "I know you don't want to hear this." I said, "Then don't say it." That almost made her smile. Almost. Then she held up the tulips and said, "I'm trying." I looked at the flowers and thought of every time she had used softness as camouflage, every casserole after an insult, every pie after an accusation, every gift with a hook hidden inside. I said, "Trying for what?" She looked away. Then she said, "To keep what is left there." It was not remorse. Inventory. Not sorrow. Loss management. She wanted what was left. My silence, my access, my willingness to keep the story blurry enough that she could still visit it without choking. I said, "You should have tried when I was 12. She flinched. "Good." Then she said, "I did the best I could with both of you." Both of you, that phrase used to confuse me. As if fairness could be measured by saying the same sentence over 2 different wrecks. I said, "No, you did what was easiest for you. That is not the same thing." She started crying then. Quiet crying. The kind that would have undone me once. Now it just looked late. I said, "You can leave the flowers on the porch if you want, but you can't bring that story in here?" She stared at me for a long second. Then she put the tulips down. She left without another word. I threw the flowers out that evening. Not because I hate tulips, because I'm done mistaking symbols for change. My father kept trying in smaller ways. A hardware store gift card for house repairs, a book Aunt Hell once loved. A voicemail saying he passed the bakery downtown and thought of me, even though I have never owned a bakery in my life and he was clearly reaching for any image of domestic peace he could borrow. Some of it annoyed me. Some of it made me sad. One thing made me laugh. 3 months after the wedding, he showed up with a toolbox and said the porch swing chain looked worn. It did. We replaced it together. No deep talk, no apology loop, just bolts, rust, and afternoon light. At one point he said, very quietly, "Your mother used to tell me if we pushed back on Dean, he would leave us." I kept tightening the wrench. Then I said, "So you let him train you?" He swallowed hard. Then he said, "Yes." That was one of the only answers he ever gave me that did not come wrapped in fog. It did not fix anything, but it was real and real matters. That is one thing this whole mess taught me. Real matters more than warm. Real matters more than family posture. Real matters more than the kind voice people use while they are emptying your pockets. The blue house taught me that too. The first winter after the wedding, the pipes in the upstairs bathroom froze. I stood there in thick socks with a hairdryer and a wrench while snow hit the windows sideways. Eli came upstairs, took one look, and said, "Well, Aunt Hell picked the right person." I laughed. Then I cried a little, not because of the pipes, because of the sentence. Picked the right person, not the easiest person, not the loudest, not the one who knew how to cry for an audience, the right person. I think that is what I had wanted my whole life without knowing the name for it. Not to be indulged, not to be praised, just to be chosen honestly. That winter, I also found one more note from Hell tucked inside an old cookbook. Apparently she had been hiding wisdom the way some people hide cash. It said, "If they ever start telling you that peace is more important than truth, ask yourself who gets fed by your silence." I keep that note in my desk now. Some days I still need it, because even after everything, there are moments when old training rises. A missed call from my mother. A holiday photo sent by an aunt. A mutual friend saying maybe enough time has passed. That phrase, "enough time has passed," as if time itself washes blood out of wood. It doesn't. What changes things is truth. Truth and consequence. Truth and distance. Truth and the refusal to keep paying for someone else's comfort. That is the actual ending here. Not the hearing, not the ring, not even the wedding. The real ending is smaller, quieter. It happened this spring. I was in the Blue House kitchen making coffee when I realized I had gone 3 whole days without thinking about Dean at all. Not in anger, not in fear, not in rehearsal. 3 full days. I just stood there in my socks with the kettle starting to whistle and thought, oh, this is what freedom feels like when it stops being dramatic and becomes ordinary. That may be the best part. Freedom is not always fireworks. Sometimes it is forgetting to brace. Sometimes it is making coffee in a house that no longer echoes with other people's demands. Sometimes it is hearing your own thoughts arrive without interruption. I used to think justice would feel louder than this. I thought it would be a courtroom slam or a perfect speech or a room full of people finally saying I was right. Some of that happened, not all. What actually healed me was simpler. Locks changed. Files saved, a porch repaired, a man beside me who never asks me to shrink, a table that stays quiet unless I choose to speak. Maybe that is the real revenge, not their humiliation. My peace. And for the first time in my life, peace no longer means my silence.